I have a lot of regrets about not going to the Reason rally. I could have met a lot of really awesome people, and I could have met a lot of really not so awesome people like Eric Hovind, for instance. I did of course see the footage of the argument between Thunderfoot and Eric Hovind, and like a lot of people, I watched that and thought, you know, he could have made that argument a lot more clearly. It seems like the argument that's most fashionable these days among Christian apologists is the presuppositional argument. Essentially, this argument says that the laws of physics, the laws of logic, the laws of math exist in material reality, but they themselves are immaterial, so the only way they could have gotten there is if they were put there by a supernatural God. And what presuppositional apologists like to do is say that if you so much as acknowledge the laws of logic or physics or math, or use them in an argument to disprove the existence of God, you already lose. Because according to them, to acknowledge the existence of these laws is to acknowledge the existence of God. And a question they like to ask is, well, if there's no God, how do you know your reasoning is valid? How do you know your observations are valid? Because unless there's a God that sets out the laws of logic, you don't even know that the argument you're making is logical. But the problem I have with that is, let's say God does exist. Even presuppositionalists are not going to say that God's existence means that everybody is infallible. Even if God did create the laws of logic, people still make mistakes in using it. So the question I would pose to Eric Hovind is, even if God did create the laws of logic, how do you know that you, a fallible human being, are applying them correctly? Even if God does exist, and even if God did create the laws of physics and math and logic, skepticism is still just as necessary. But the biggest problem that I have with presuppositional apologetics is that it accuses empiricists and skeptics of making claims about reality that they're not really making. Presuppositionalists seem to think that when skeptics assert a law of physics or a law of logic or of math, that they're saying something about objective reality. We're not. Science is based in phenomenological epistemology. Phenomenology is a branch of philosophy that sets aside the question of whether our observations and experiences reflect some objectively existing independent reality. It says, yeah, everything that we see could be completely illusory, but let's just set that question aside for a second and let's just look at the experiences and observations themselves. To clarify, Stephen Hawking, in A Brief History of Time, gives a definition of what a scientific theory is. He says that a theory is just a model of the universe, or a restricted part of it, and a set of rules that relate to quantities in the model to observations that we make. It exists only in our minds and does not have any other reality, whatever that might mean. So when scientists talk about scientific theories or laws, they're talking simply about observations that they have made. We don't know the degree to which our descriptions of our observations match some independently existing reality, and we don't claim to. Science does two things. It describes observations and it comes up with ways of thinking about those observations that allow us to predict future observations. So then a presuppositionalist may ask, well then how do you know that God doesn't exist? The reason why science rejects God and rejects the supernatural in general is because these are ideas that are meaningless because they are useless for making predictions. Either they can't be used to make predictions at all, or if you do make a prediction based on an idea that has supernatural elements in it, chances are it's not going to come true. So to Eric Hovind I would say, how do we know that our judgments are reliable in the sense that they reflect some objective reality? Well, we don't. It's possible we can't. And neither can you, Eric.